I got fired from my own company. And in that moment, I learned something that no business book ever taught me. Power isn't what you project, it's what you withhold. When I came back to Apple, I didn't come back louder. I came back stiller. And that stillness, that calculated, intentional silence, became the most potent tool I ever wielded. Today I'm breaking down the ancient framework that explains why. Han Fei's law of presence. This isn't about charisma. It's about physics. When I left Apple in 1985, I was devastated. I mean, truly broken. I'd spent years building this company from nothing, and suddenly I was on the outside looking in. And during those years away, at Pixar, I had time to think, really think, not about products or market share or competition, but about something deeper, something I'd gotten completely wrong the first time around. I thought leadership was about having all the answers, about being the smartest person in the room, about speaking first, speaking loudest, making sure everyone knew I was in charge. And you know what? That version of me, that younger, more insecure Steve, he thought respect was something you demanded, something you fought for, something you earned by being impressive. I was so wrong, it's almost embarrassing. When I came back to Apple in 1997, the company was 90 days from bankruptcy. Everyone expected me to come in swinging, to make grand pronouncements, to immediately start talking about vision and strategy and the future. And you know what I did instead? I sat in meetings and said almost nothing. I watched. I listened. I let the silence do the heavy lifting. And people were terrified. They thought I was angry. They thought I was disappointed. They misread my stillness as judgment. But here's what was really happening. I was letting them reveal themselves. I was creating space for truth to emerge. Because when you fill every silence with your own voice, you rob everyone else of the opportunity to show you who they really are. You rob yourself of the chance to actually see what's in front of you. And something shifted, something profound. The less I spoke, the more weight my words carried when I finally did speak. The less I moved, the more people noticed when I leaned forward. The less I reacted, the more people started bringing me their best work instead of their best excuses. That's when I started studying Han Fei, this ancient Chinese philosopher who understood something about power that the West still doesn't really get. Han Fei lived over 2,000 years ago, and he wrote about governance and influence and authority in a way that's so cutting, so precise, that it makes modern leadership books look like fortune cookies. And his central insight was this: the most powerful position is the still point at the center. Not the loudest voice, not the most charismatic performer. The still point, the axis around which everything else rotates. Now, before we go any deeper, I need you to understand why this matters to you. Not just intellectually, but practically, in your life. Right now, here's the lie you've been sold. You've been told that respect comes from being impressive, articulate, or dominant. That if you just speak with more confidence, interrupt less, smile more, dress sharper, then people will take you seriously. You've been taught that influence is something you perform. That authority is something you demonstrate. That respect is a reward for getting all your ducks in a row and presenting them beautifully. And so you work on your elevator pitch. You practice your handshake. You rehearse what you're going to say in that meeting. You try to anticipate every question, prepare every answer, control every variable. You walk into rooms thinking, I need to make them see how valuable I am. I need to prove myself. I need to earn their respect. And you know what happens? You walk out feeling exhausted, undervalued, and somehow less respected than when you walked in. Because you've been playing a game where the rules are rigged against you from the start. But here's the truth Han Fei knew. The truth I learned the hard way. Respect is not a reward for performance. It's a response to presence. And presence isn't built through addition. It's built through subtraction. It's built by removing all the nervous energy, all the defensive explanations, all the desperate attempts to prove you belong. It's built by trusting that your simple existence in a space is enough. This video is going to teach you why trying to earn respect guarantees you'll lose it. How silence creates gravitational authority that words destroy. The specific body language and energetic principles that trigger involuntary respect in others even when you're not speaking. and why the most powerful people in history spoke the least. But here's what makes this different from every other communication or leadership video you've watched. I'm not teaching you manipulation tactics or fake it till you make it nonsense. I'm not giving you scripts or power poses or ways to trick people into thinking you're confident. I'm teaching you the physics of human hierarchy, the actual laws that govern status and influence, laws that have been operating since humans first gathered in groups, laws that don't care about your personality type or your industry or your background. This isn't self-help. This is architecture. We're going to look at how respect is actually structured, how it actually flows, how it actually operates in the invisible space between people. And once you see it, once you really understand it, you can't unsee it. Every interaction you have for the rest of your life will be different. So let me tell you a story. This happened about 6 months after I came back to Apple. We were preparing for a keynote, one of the big ones. Macworld, I think. The team had been working for weeks on the presentation. We're talking about some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. Engineers, designers, marketers, really brilliant minds. And we had this rehearsal, full run-through. I sat in the back of the auditorium, and they went through the entire presentation. Slides, demos, everything. And it was fine. It was competent. It was professional. But it wasn't magic. It wasn't the kind of thing that would make people's hearts race. It wasn't insanely great. So when they finished, they all looked at me, waiting for feedback, waiting for direction, waiting for me to tell them what to fix. And you know what I did? Nothing. I sat there in silence. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I didn't pull out a notebook and start listing improvements. I just sat there, looking at the stage for what must have been 47 minutes. 47 minutes of silence. And I could feel the room. The tension was incredible. People started fidgeting, looking at each other, whispering. Someone coughed nervously. Another person stood up like they were going to leave, then sat back down. The discomfort in that room was almost unbearable, because silence, especially from the person with the most power, creates a kind of vacuum, a pressure system, and people will do almost anything to relieve that pressure. After about 20 minutes, someone spoke up, one of the engineers. He said, "I think the demo in the second section is too complicated. We're explaining the technology instead of showing what it does for people." And then someone else jumped in. "The opening is too safe. We're starting with specs when we should be starting with a feeling." And it was like a dam broke. Everyone started talking, really talking, not defending their work or protecting their turf, but actually being honest about what wasn't working. And I still didn't say anything. I just let them solve it themselves. Let them find their own answers. And after another 15 minutes of this incredibly productive chaos, I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and said one sentence. "Now you're thinking like artists." That was it. That was all I said. And then I left. And you know what happened? That keynote became one of our best. Not because I gave them a bunch of notes. Not because I fixed their work. But because my silence forced them to stop performing for me and start being honest with themselves. My stillness created space for real thinking, real creativity, real excellence. See, what I understood in that moment, what Han Fei understood 2,000 years ago, is that the person who speaks first loses. The person who fills the silence loses. The person who rushes to ease the discomfort loses. Because the moment you do that, you're telling everyone in the room that you can't tolerate the tension. And if you can't tolerate tension, you can't hold power. Power lives in the pause. Authority lives in the space between words. Respect lives in your willingness to let discomfort exist without rushing to resolve it. Now, I want to tell you another story. This one's not about me. It's a parable, actually. Something I heard years ago that perfectly captures what Han Fei was teaching. There was once a master swordsman, one of those legendary figures, you know? The kind of person whose name alone made enemies surrender. And one day, he was invited to the palace to meet with the emperor's chief advisor. This advisor was known for being incredibly eloquent, a master of rhetoric and persuasion, the kind of person who could talk you into anything. So they sit down together, and the advisor starts talking. He talks about military strategy, about politics, about philosophy, about history. He's weaving together these elaborate arguments, quoting ancient texts, demonstrating his knowledge. And he goes on like this for over an hour, just talking and talking, filling every moment with words. And the swordsman? He doesn't say anything. He just sits there, completely still, with his calm expression on his face. And after about an hour and a half of this, the swordsman reaches over to the tea set between them, picks up an empty cup, and places it in front of the advisor. Just sets it there, an empty cup, and then he goes back to sitting in silence. The advisor stops mid-sentence. He looks at the cup, confused. Then he looks at the swordsman. "What does this mean?" he asks. "Why did you put an empty cup in front of me?" And the swordsman finally speaks. His first words in over 90 minutes. He says, "A cup must be empty to be filled. A mouth must be closed to hold power." And then he stands up and leaves. The meeting is over. Now, think about what just happened in that story. The advisor spent an hour and a half trying to impress the swordsman, trying to demonstrate his value, trying to earn respect through the sheer volume and quality of his words. And in doing so, he completely emptied himself. He poured out everything he had, and by the end, there was nothing left. He was spent, depleted. And the swordsman knew that if you've emptied yourself in an attempt to impress someone, you've already lost. But the swordsman? He remained full the entire time. Not because he was hoarding information or playing games, but because he understood that receptivity, the ability to receive, to listen, to hold space, is a form of strength, not weakness. The empty cup isn't weak because it's empty. It's powerful because it has capacity. It can be filled. And that's what most people get backwards about silence and stillness. They think it's passive. They think it's about having nothing to say. But real silence isn't empty. It's full. It's loaded. It's like a drawn bow, full of potential energy. It's like the pause before thunder. It's not absence. It's concentrated presence. So if silence is this powerful, if stillness is this important, why are we all so terrified of it? Why do we rush to fill every gap in conversation? Why do we feel like we need to keep talking, keep moving, keep proving ourselves? Because we've been trained to think that visibility equals value. That if we're not constantly demonstrating our worth, people will forget we exist. We've been taught that silence is emptiness, and emptiness is weakness. We live in a culture that mistakes noise for signal, that confuses motion with progress, that thinks the person talking must be the person thinking. But here's what Han Fei understood, what that swordsman understood, what I eventually learned. Your presence is finite. It's not infinite. You only have so much of it. And every word you speak, every gesture you make, every reaction you have, it spends that presence. It depletes your battery. And most people bankrupt themselves in the first 5 minutes of any interaction. Han Fei called this the law of conservation of presence. And it's one of the most important principles you will ever learn. Your presence is like a currency. And like any currency, its value depends on scarcity. If you're handing it out constantly, throwing it around, spending it on every little thing, it becomes worthless. But if you conserve it, if you spend it carefully and deliberately, each expenditure has tremendous impact. Think about the people you respect most. The ones who command attention when they walk into a room. The ones whose opinions carry weight. The ones who don't need to fight for space or prove themselves. How much do they talk? How much do they explain themselves? How much unnecessary movement do they make? Not much, right? They're economical with their presence. Every word is chosen. Every gesture is intentional. Every reaction is measured. And that scarcity creates value. That restraint creates gravity. People lean toward them because they're not pushing. They're not throwing their presence at you. They're letting you come to them. I see this all the time in business. Someone walks into a pitch meeting and immediately starts talking. They're nervous, so they fill the silence. They explain their background, their qualifications, why they're the right person for this project. They're spending their presence before the meeting even starts. And by the time they get to the actual pitch, the most important part, they're already in the negative. They've already established themselves as someone who needs validation. But then you get someone else who walks in, sits down, makes eye contact, and waits. Just waits. They let the other person speak first. They let the silence sit. And in that silence, they're communicating something profound. I don't need anything from you. I'm complete in myself. You could choose to engage with me or not, but I'm not going to perform for your approval. And that person gets the deal. Every time. Not because their pitch is better. Not because they have better credentials. But because they've understood something fundamental about human psychology. We respect what doesn't need us. The moment you seem to need someone's approval, you've inverted the power dynamic. You put them above you. You've made them the judge and yourself the supplicant. And it doesn't matter how good your presentation is after that. You've already established the hierarchy, and you're on the bottom. But when you demonstrate through your stillness, through your comfort with silence, through your lack of nervous energy, when you demonstrate that you're fine whether they approve of you or not, you've done something powerful. You've made yourself the scarce resource. You've made them all win you over. You've flipped the entire dynamic without saying a word. Now, this is where people usually get confused. They think I'm saying you should be cold or aloof or arrogant, that you should walk around acting like you're better than everyone else. That's not at all. In fact, that's just another form of trying too hard. Arrogance is loud. It's insecure. It's constantly telling you how great it is because deep down it doesn't believe it. What I'm talking about is something completely different. It's not about being superior. It's about being secure. It's about being so comfortable in your own skin that you don't need external validation to feel okay. It's about trusting that your value isn't dependent on other people's reactions to you. And that trust, that deep, internal sense of okayness, it radiates. People feel it. They can't help but feel it. Because most people are walking around desperate for approval, constantly looking for confirmation that they're good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. And when they encounter someone who isn't doing that, someone who seems genuinely at peace with themselves, it's magnetic. It's compelling. It creates this automatic respect that has nothing to do with credentials or accomplishments or charisma. Han Fei wrote about this. He said that the sage ruler governs through stillness, not through constant action or intervention or control, but through a quality of presence that makes right action natural for everyone around them. They create the conditions for excellence without forcing it. They hold the center without dominating. And you might be thinking, okay, that sounds nice philosophically, but how does this actually work in practice? How do I become this still point? How do I develop this quality of presence? And that's what we're going to get into now. The actual mechanics. The specific principles that govern how respect flows. First principle, silence is not passive. It's structurally active. When you don't fill space, others must. This is simple physics, really. Nature abhors a vacuum. When you create empty space in a conversation, in a meeting, in any social interaction, that space demands to be filled. And whoever fills it reveals themselves in the process. I used to do this in product reviews all the time. Someone would show me their work, and instead of immediately giving feedback, I'd just look at it, really look at it, in silence. And you know what would happen? They'd start talking. They'd start explaining. And in that explanation, they'd reveal what they were uncertain about. They'd point out the weak spots themselves. They'd tell me exactly where the problems were without me having to ask. The silence did the work for me. It created pressure, and that pressure forced truth to the surface. If I'd jumped in with my thoughts right away, I'd have gotten their defensive response, their justifications, their excuses. But the silence bypassed all of that. It went straight to what was real. This is what I mean when I say silence is load-bearing. It's holding something up. It's creating structure. In architecture, the empty space in a building isn't just absence. It's what allows the building to function. The rooms, the hallways, the open areas. That emptiness is what makes the solid parts meaningful. It's the same with communication. Your silence isn't just the absence of words. It's what gives your words shape and meaning when they finally come. And here's the thing about this. You're not being manipulative when you do this. You're not playing games. You're actually being more honest than if you jumped in with immediate feedback. Because immediate feedback is often reactive. It's not considered. It's not thoughtful. It's just your first impression, your gut reaction, whatever pops into your head. But when you take time to be silent, to really process what you're seeing or hearing, your eventual response is more valuable. It's more true. It comes from a deeper place. So the silence isn't a trick. It's actually a form of respect. It's saying, I'm taking this seriously enough to really think about it before I respond. Second principle, your stillness forces others to reveal themselves. This is related to the first principle, but goes deeper. See, most people are performing most of the time. They're managing their image. They're controlling what you see of them. They're showing you the version of themselves they want you to believe in. But performance requires energy. It requires constant maintenance. And it can't survive in sustained silence. If you stay still long enough, if you hold the space long enough, people's performances start to crack. Not because you're attacking them or challenging them, but simply because they can't maintain the performance in the face of your neutrality. I remember this one time, we were interviewing someone for a senior position. Really impressive resume. Great schools, great companies, great references. And the interview was going well. They were saying all the right things. But something felt off to me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my gut was telling me something wasn't right. So I did something unusual. I stopped asking questions. I just sat there, looking at them expectantly, as if I was waiting for them to tell me something important. And there was this long, uncomfortable silence. Must have been 3 or 4 minutes, which feels like an eternity in an interview. And eventually, they broke. They started talking about how they were actually fired from their last job, how they'd made some decisions they weren't proud of, how they were trying to rebuild their reputation. And none of that was in their application. None of it was in their prepared answers. But it was the truth. And it only came out because I gave it space to emerge. Now, we didn't hire that person, but not because they'd been fired. That's not the issue. The issue was that they'd been willing to hide it, to perform a version of themselves that wasn't real. And if they do that in the interview, they'd do it on the job. But my stillness revealed that. It brought the truth to the surface. This is what Han Fei meant when he talked about governing through non-action. It's not that you do nothing. It's that you don't force. You create the conditions where reality reveals itself. You trust that stillness will show you what performing would obscure. Third principle, respect flows upward towards stillness. This is the one that really changed everything for me. See, in any social hierarchy, in any group dynamic, there's an invisible flow of energy. And that energy naturally moves toward stability, toward calm, toward the person who seems least affected by the chaos around them. Think about a crisis situation. Who do people look to? Not the person who's panicking, not the person who's frantically trying to solve everything. They look to the person who seems calm, the person who's still taking deep breaths, the person who's not adding to the chaos. That person becomes the natural leader, not because they claimed that position, but because everyone else gave it to them. Anxious movement, defensive explanation, overclarification, all of these things signal lower status. They signal that you're affected, that you're reactive, that you don't have control over your own state. And people unconsciously register that. They feel it, and their respect flows away from you toward whoever seems more grounded. This isn't fair, necessarily. It's not always accurate. The person who's still might just be emotionally shut down. The person who's anxious might actually care more. But we're not talking about what's fair or right. We're talking about what is. We're talking about laws that operate whether we like them or not. And the law is, stillness reads as strength. Not because still people are always strong, but because strength enables stillness. If you're genuinely secure, if you're genuinely capable, you don't need to prove it constantly. You can afford to be still. So stillness becomes a signal of security, even when it's not actually backed by anything real. This is why fake confidence sometimes works, by the way. If you can mimic the external markers of internal security, the stillness, the calm, the lack of defensive reaction, people will often treat you as if you're secure, which then actually makes you more secure. It's a weird feedback loop. But here's the problem with faking it. It's exhausting. Maintaining a performance of stillness when you're actually anxious inside takes tremendous energy. And eventually, you'll crack. Eventually, the real state will leak through. Whereas if you actually develop internal stillness, if you actually become secure, it's effortless. It's natural. It's who you are, not what you're doing. And that's what I want for you. Not a performance of confidence, but actual groundedness, actual security, actual presence. And the way you develop that is by understanding the fourth principle. Fourth principle, economy of motion. Every gesture is a micro-promise. When you move constantly, when you fidget, when you shift your weight, adjust your collar, touch your face, tap your fingers, every little movement is a tiny expenditure of presence. And more importantly, it trains people to ignore your movement. It becomes background noise. But when you move rarely, when you're genuinely still most of the time, every shift in your posture becomes an event. It becomes meaningful. People notice. I remember watching this documentary about great conductors once. And one of them, I think it was Herbert von Karajan, was talking about how the most important tool a conductor has is restraint. He said that if you're constantly waving your arms, constantly gesturing, the orchestra stops responding to you. Your movements become wallpaper. But if you're mostly still, if you conserve your gestures, then a tiny lift of your finger can change everything. The musicians are watching so carefully, waiting for that signal, that the smallest movement has maximum impact. It's the same in any form of leadership, the same in any interaction where influence matters. If you're constantly in motion, your motion becomes meaningless. But if you're still, if you're economical with your movement, every gesture carries weight. Han Fei called this governing through stillness. And he said it was the highest form of leadership, not because stillness is morally superior or spiritually advanced, but because it's strategically effective. It conserves your energy while maximizing your impact. It makes you the axis around which everything else rotates. Now, let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat completely still for 5 minutes? Not meditating, not sleeping, just sitting in a chair, in a normal situation, completely still? Most people can't do it. They start fidgeting within 30 seconds. They need to check their phone, adjust their position, do something with their hands. And that restlessness, that inability to just be still, it's costing them respect in every interaction they have. Because on a deep, primal level, stillness signals self-control. It signals that you're not at the mercy of your impulses. It signals that you have mastery over yourself. And if you have mastery over yourself, you might have mastery over the situation. You might be someone worth following, worth respecting, worth listening to when you finally do speak. This is what I mean when I say this is physics, not psychology. We're not talking about what should be true. We're talking about what is true, about how human beings actually respond to each other beneath all the socialization and etiquette and conscious thought. We respond to markers of stability. We respect what appears secure. And stillness is the most fundamental marker of security. So here's a question I want you to sit with. What if the reason no one listens isn't that you're not saying enough, but that you're saying too much? What if the reason you don't command respect isn't that you need to be more impressive, but that you need to be more still? What if everything you've been trying to add to yourself is actually the problem, and the solution is subtraction? This is hard for people to accept because we live in an additive culture. We're always trying to get more. More skills, more credentials, more achievements, more connections. We think the path to respect is to accumulate more impressive things about ourselves. But Han Fei understood that real power comes from the opposite direction. From stripping away. From removing everything that's not essential. From finding the still point at your center and operating from there. When I came back to Apple, I didn't come back with more. I came back with less. Less features in our products. Less complexity in our message. Less tolerance for anything that wasn't essential. And that subtraction, that ruthless focus on what mattered, that's what saved the company. Not addition, subtraction. And it's the same with presence. The path to commanding respect isn't to add more confidence or more charisma or more impressive things to say. It's to subtract all the noise, all the nervous energy, all the performing, all the trying, until what's left is just you, just your actual presence, unadorned and undefended. Now, I know this is starting to sound abstract, so let's get practical. Let's talk about what you can actually do. How do you develop this quality of stillness? How do you become someone who naturally commands respect without needing to speak? First, practice the 3-breath rule. This is simple but powerful. Before you speak in any important conversation, take 3 full breaths. And I mean full breaths. Inhale deeply through your nose, expanding your belly. Hold it for a moment. Then exhale slowly through your mouth. Do this 3 times before you say anything. This does several things. First, it oxygenates your brain, which helps you think more clearly. Second, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which calms you down. Third, and most importantly, it creates a pause, a gap, a moment of silence that you're choosing, rather than filling out of habit or anxiety. And in that gap, something shifts. The conversation stops being reactive and becomes intentional. You stop being pulled along by the momentum of the interaction and start directing it from a place of groundedness. You stop performing and start being present. Now, here's what's going to happen when you try this. It's going to feel uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. 3 breaths of silence can feel like an eternity, especially if someone just asked you a question. Your mind is going to scream at you to answer immediately. You're going to feel rude. You're going to feel awkward. You're going to feel like you need to fill that space right now. And that discomfort is exactly what you need to learn to tolerate. Because that discomfort, that pressure to fill the silence immediately, that's what's been controlling you your whole life. That's what's been making you spend your presence recklessly. That's what's been preventing you from commanding respect. You've been enslaved to your inability to tolerate discomfort. But when you take those 3 breaths, when you let the discomfort exist without rushing to resolve it, you're training yourself. You're building the muscle of stillness. You're proving to yourself that you can survive the gap. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. Eventually, that pause becomes natural. It becomes part of who you are. And people start treating you differently without consciously knowing why. Second practice, have your words. For 1 week, I want you to cut everything you say in half. If you were going to explain something in 6 sentences, do it in 3. If you were going to use 3 examples, use 1. If you're going to spend 5 minutes on something, spend 2.5. This is harder than it sounds because you're going to feel like you're not being thorough enough. You're going to feel like people won't understand unless you explain more. You're going to feel like you need to fill in all the gaps for them. But resist that feeling. Trust that people are smart enough to fill in some gaps themselves. Trust that saying less makes what you do say more memorable. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sound smarter. Way smarter. Not because you're saying smarter things, but because brevity creates the impression of confidence. When someone can say complex things simply, we assume they really understand it. When someone rambles and over-explains, we assume they're unsure. It's not fair, but it's true. And more importantly, you're going to notice how much of your talking is just nervous energy. How much of it is unnecessary. How much of it is actually diluting your message rather than strengthening it. You'll start to see your own patterns. The phrases you repeat. The explanations you give that no one asked for. The ways you undercut your own points by qualifying them too much. And once you see those patterns, once you become aware of how much you're talking without adding value, you can start to change them. Not by replacing them with different words, but by replacing them with silence. By trusting that less is more. By understanding that every word you remove gives more power to the words that remain. Third practice, the stillness inventory. This is an awareness exercise. For the next few days, I want you to notice every time you make an unnecessary movement. Every time you fidget, adjust your clothes, touch your face, shift your weight, check your phone when you don't need to. Just notice it. Don't try to stop it yet. Just become aware of it. And here's the key question to ask yourself each time. Am I doing this because it serves clarity or because I'm uncomfortable? Am I moving because this movement communicates something important or because I can't tolerate stillness? Most of the time, you'll find it's the latter. Most of your movement is just static. It's noise. It's your discomfort leaking out through your body. Once you've built that awareness, once you spend a few days really seeing your patterns, then you can start to consciously choose stillness. Not by forcing yourself to be rigid, but by noticing the impulse to move and asking, is this necessary? And if it's not, just let it go. Just return to stillness. At first, this is going to feel weird. You're going to feel stiff or unnatural. But stick with it, because what you're actually doing is stripping away all the excess movement that's been costing you presence. You're cleaning up your signal. You're removing the noise so that when you do move, when you do gesture, it actually means something. Fourth practice, the exit without goodbye. This one's interesting because it goes against all our social conditioning. We've been taught that we need to wrap up every interaction with pleasantries, with closure, with reassurances that everything's okay, and we'll talk soon, and thank you so much, and it was great seeing you and all of that. But here's what all of that does. It dissipates your presence. It turns your exit into a fade-out rather than a hard stop. It makes you softer, less defined, less memorable. So here's what I want you to try. When a conversation reaches its natural endpoint, just leave. Not rudely, not abruptly, but cleanly, without all the extra cushioning. If you're in a meeting and the meeting is done, stand up and walk out. If you're having a conversation and it's reached its conclusion, nod and leave. You don't need to fill the ending with verbal padding. You don't need to soften the edge of your departure. Because that edge, that clean break, it's what creates definition. It's what makes you memorable. Now, this doesn't mean being cold or unfriendly. You can smile. You can make eye contact. You can say thanks if thanks are warranted. But you don't need to linger. You don't need to create a whole production out of leaving. Because every moment you spend easing your exit is a moment you're asking for permission to go. It's a moment you're suggesting that your departure needs to be approved. And that's a subtle signal of lower status. When you leave cleanly, without asking permission or seeking reassurance that it's okay to go, you're demonstrating something. That closure is something you grant, not something you beg for. That your presence is something you offer, not something you impose. And people respect that. They might not consciously notice it, but they feel it. I used to do this all the time at Apple. I'd be in a meeting, we'd solve the problem, or make the decision, or reach the conclusion, and I'd just get up and leave. No. Okay, well, I think that's everything, unless anyone has anything else. All right then, great work everybody. Really appreciate your time. None of that. Just done. Stand up. Walk out. And you know what? People loved it. Not because I was being dismissive, but because I was treating their time as valuable. I wasn't wasting 5 minutes on unnecessary social cushioning. I was saying, through my actions, we're done. This was important. Now it's over. Clean. Defined. Complete. And that definition, that clarity of boundaries, is something people crave but rarely get. Most interactions are fuzzy. They fade in and out. They don't have clear beginnings or endings. And that fuzziness is exhausting. It requires constant calibration, constant negotiation. But when someone brings clarity, when they define the space cleanly, it's a relief. It creates structure, and people respect structure. So those are 4 practices for specific things you can start doing today. But beneath all of them is a deeper principle, a deeper understanding that I want to make sure you really get. Because without this understanding, these practices might just become new performances, new ways to try to control how people see you. And that defeats the whole purpose. The deeper principle is this: you cannot command respect by trying to command respect. The attempt itself undermines the goal. Because trying is visible. Trying is audible. Trying has a smell to it. And when people detect that you're trying to make them respect you, they instinctively pull back. They withhold it. Not consciously, not maliciously, but as an automatic response to the energy of need. This is the paradox at the heart of everything Han Fei taught. You gain influence by relinquishing the need to influence. You gain respect by not needing respect. You become powerful by not trying to be powerful. And this sounds like mystical nonsense until you actually understand what's happening psychologically. When you need something from someone, their approval, their respect, their validation, you give them power over you. You make them the gatekeeper of your okayness. And people can feel that. They can sense when you need them to respond to you in a certain way. And that need puts them in a superior position, whether they want to be there or not. It inverts the relationship. But when you genuinely don't need their response, when you're complete in yourself regardless of what they think of you, something magical happens. They start wanting your approval. They start caring what you think. They start trying to win you over. The whole dynamic flips without anyone consciously choosing to flip it. It's just the natural flow of energy towards self-sufficiency and away from need. This is why confidence is attractive and desperation is repellent. Not because of some moral judgment, but because confidence says, I'm fine either way, and desperation says, I need you to make me okay. And nobody wants the responsibility of making someone else okay. It's too heavy. It's too much pressure. So we naturally move away from people who put that weight on us. Now, here's where people get stuck. They say, okay, I understand that I shouldn't need respect, but how do I stop needing it? How do I become genuinely secure when I don't feel secure? And this is a legitimate question, because I'm not telling you to fake it. I'm not telling you to pretend you don't care when you do. That's just another performance, and performances always crack eventually. What I'm telling you is to build actual security, real groundedness. And the way you do that is not by trying to feel confident, but by building evidence that you can handle discomfort. Because that's what security actually is. It's not the absence of fear or doubt or uncertainty. It's the knowledge that you can tolerate those feelings without falling apart. Think about it. When are you most insecure? Where are you most desperate for approval? It's when you don't trust yourself to handle rejection. When you think that if someone doesn't respect you, if someone doesn't approve of you, it's going to destroy you. You need their positive response because you don't believe you can survive their negative one. But what if you knew you could survive it? What if you had evidence, real lived experience, that you could face disapproval and be okay? That you could face rejection and be okay? That you could face criticism and be okay? Then you wouldn't need to control other people's responses. You wouldn't need to perform for their approval. Because you know that whatever they throw at you, you can handle it. And that's what these practices are actually building. When you take 3 breaths before speaking and tolerate the discomfort of silence, you're proving to yourself that you can handle awkwardness. When you have your words and resist the urge to over-explain, you're proving that you can handle being misunderstood. When you sit still despite the impulse to fidget, you're proving you can handle your own restlessness. When you leave without excessive goodbyes, you're proving you can handle the ambiguity of unclear endings. Each time you do these things, you're building a database of evidence that you're capable of handling discomfort. And as that database grows, your actual security grows. Not fake confidence, not performed poise, but real, lived knowledge that you're resilient, that you're capable, that you don't need to control everything to be okay. And as that security grows, something interesting happens. You start caring less about respect, not because you've decided respect doesn't matter, but because you genuinely don't need it to feel okay about yourself. You still appreciate it when it comes. You still prefer it to disrespect, but you're not depending on it. You're not organizing your behavior around trying to earn it. And paradoxically, that's when respect starts flowing toward you effortlessly. Because people sense that shift. They sense that you're not trying anymore. They sense that you're secure in yourself. And that security is magnetic. It's compelling. It creates this automatic respect that has nothing to do with what you're saying or doing and everything to do with who you're being. This is what Han Fei meant when he talked about governing through non-action. It's not that you do nothing. It's that you stop forcing. You stop pushing. You stop trying to make things happen. You create the conditions through your stillness, through your security, through your presence, where the right things happen naturally. I see this principle everywhere now. In design, in leadership, in relationships, in art. The best things happen when you stop trying so hard. When you trust the process. When you get out of your own way and let things unfold. And it's counterintuitive because we've been taught that success comes from effort, from pushing, from making things happen. But there are 2 kinds of effort. There's the effort of forcing, which is exhausting and usually counterproductive. And there's the effort of creating conditions, which is subtle and powerful. You don't force a tree to grow. You plant it in good soil, give it water and sunlight, and then you get out of the way. You create the conditions for growth and let nature do what nature does. It's the same with respect. You don't force people to respect you. You create the conditions through your stillness, your security, your presence, where respect naturally emerges. And then you get out of the way. You let it happen without grasping at it. Now, I want to address something that might be coming up for you. You might be thinking, this all sounds great for someone like Steve Jobs, someone who's already successful, already proven, already has credibility. But what about me? I'm starting from scratch. I don't have the luxury of being still and waiting for people to come to me. I need to prove myself. I need to fight for every inch. And I get that. I really do, because I've been there. Before Apple, I was nobody, just a kid in a garage with an idea. And yeah, I had to hustle. I had to prove myself. I had to knock on doors and make things happen. So I'm not saying you should be passive. I'm not saying you should wait for success to fall into your lap. What I'm saying is that even when you're hustling, even when you're fighting for opportunity, you can do it from a place of presence rather than desperation. You can knock on doors without begging them to open. You can pitch your ideas without needing approval. You can work your ass off without giving away your power. Because here's the thing, people can tell the difference. They can tell the difference between someone who's hungry and someone who's desperate. They can tell the difference between someone who wants success and someone who needs it. And they respect the former while pitying the latter. Hunger says, I'm going to make this happen. Watch me. Desperation says, please let me make this happen. I need you to give me a chance. Hunger is still grounded. Desperation is unmoored. And that groundedness, that sense that you're okay whether this particular opportunity works out or not, that's what allows you to maintain presence even when you're just starting out. When I was trying to get funding for Apple, I went into meetings with venture capitalists who had all the power. They had the money. They had the connections. They had the credibility. I had a prototype and a dream. But I never went in there acting like I needed them more than they needed me. I went in there believing, genuinely believing, that I was offering them an opportunity, not begging for one. And sometimes they turned me down. Sometimes they thought I was arrogant or naive or unrealistic. But the ones who got it, the ones who eventually funded us, they respected that energy. They respected that I wasn't willing to compromise the vision to make them comfortable. They respected that I was bringing them something valuable, not asking them to save me. That's what I mean by maintaining presence, even when you're starting from nothing. It's not about pretending you're already successful. It's about knowing that your value isn't determined by other people's recognition of it. It's about being willing to walk away if the terms aren't right. It's about trusting that if this door doesn't open, another one will. And here's the crazy thing. When you operate from that place, when you genuinely believe you're offering value rather than begging for approval, you make better decisions. You don't take bad deals out of desperation. You don't compromise your vision to please someone who doesn't get it. You don't waste years of your life trying to convince people who will never be convinced. You move on. You find the people who do get it, and you build something great with them. This is what Han Fei understood about power. It's not something you take or earn or demand. It's something that flows toward whoever is most grounded, most secure, most still. And you can be grounded even when you're broke. You can be secure even when you're unknown. You can be still even when everything around you is chaotic. Because groundedness isn't about your external circumstances. It's about your internal state. It's about whether you're reacting to the world or responding to it. Whether you're being pulled around by anxiety and need, or whether you're acting from a centered place of clarity and purpose. Let me tell you about a moment that really crystallized this for me. This was back in the next days between my 2 stints at Apple. We were struggling. The computer wasn't selling. We were burning through money. We were on the verge of going under. And I was in a meeting with a potential investor who basically had the power to save the company or let it die. And he's sitting there asking me all these questions, poking holes in the business plan, challenging my assumptions. And I could feel the desperation rising in me, the need to convince him, the fear that if I didn't say the right thing, it was all over. And I started to go into performance mode, started trying to dazzle him with my vision, my passion, my belief in what we were building. And then I stopped, right in the middle of the sentence. I just stopped talking, and I took a breath. And I realized something. I didn't need this guy. I mean, yes, the money would help. But I didn't need this specific person to believe in me for my vision to be valid. If he didn't get it, someone else would. Or I'd find another way. Or I'd go down swinging. But I didn't need his approval to know that what I was building mattered. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. I stopped trying to convince him. I stopped performing. I just started telling him the truth about what we were doing, why it mattered, what the challenges were. No spin. No salesmanship. Just honesty from a grounded place. And you know what? He invested. And afterwards, he told me that he'd been planning to say no. He thought I was too stubborn, too unwilling to compromise, too unrealistic. But when I stopped trying to sell him, when I just started being real with him, he saw something that changed his mind. He saw that I wasn't asking for his permission to believe in my vision. I was offering him the chance to be part of it. And that made all the difference. That's the power of presence. That's what happens when you stop trying to control how people see you and just allow them to see you as you are. Not because you're perfect or impressive or have it all figured out, but because you're grounded enough not to need to pretend. Now, let's talk about what this looks like in everyday life. Because I don't want you to think this only applies to big meetings or important negotiations or high-stakes moments. This applies to every interaction you have, every conversation, every moment when you're in the presence of another human being. Think about small talk. Most people hate small talk because it feels fake and meaningless. And it is usually, but you know why? Because both people are performing. Both people are managing their image. Both people are saying the things they think they're supposed to say rather than what they actually think or feel. And that creates this exhausting dance where nobody's really present. But what if you brought presence to small talk? What if you actually listen when someone asked how you are, instead of automatically saying fine? What if you gave honest, specific answers instead of generic ones? What if you asked questions you actually cared about the answers to, instead of questions you think you're supposed to ask? I started doing this years ago, and it completely changed my interactions with people. Someone asks how I am, and instead of fine, I might say, honestly, I'm frustrated. I've been working on this problem for days, and I can't crack it. Or I'm great. I just had this insight that's going to change everything we're doing. Or I'm tired, been pushing too hard and need to slow down. And you know what happens? The whole conversation changes. It becomes real. The other person drops their performance too. They start being honest. And suddenly small talk isn't small anymore. It's actual human connection. And people remember you. Not because you were charming or impressive, but because you were real. Because you brought presence to a space that's usually just performance. This is what I mean when I say presence transforms everything. It's not just about respect or power or influence, though it does create those things. It's about actually being alive in your interactions instead of sleepwalking through them. It's about treating every moment as if it matters, because it does. And here's something else I've noticed. The more present you become, the less you care about respect, but the more you get it. It's this beautiful paradox. Because presence isn't about trying to get something from people. It's about being fully available to what is. And when you're fully available, people feel seen. They feel heard. They feel like they matter. And that creates this automatic appreciation, this respect that has nothing to do with your accomplishments or credentials or status. I've had conversations with janitors that were more real, more present, more mutually respectful than conversations with CEOs. Because it's not about position or power. It's about whether both people are actually there. Whether you're two human beings connecting or two personas performing. And the beautiful thing is, once you start living this way, once you start bringing presence to everything you do, you can't go back. The performances start to feel suffocating. The small talk starts to feel unbearable. You become allergic to fakeness because you've tasted what real connection feels like. But I want to warn you about something. This path isn't always comfortable. In fact, it's often deeply uncomfortable. Because when you stop performing, when you stop managing your image, you become vulnerable. You reveal yourself. And that's scary. When you're still, people see you more clearly. When you're silent, your truth becomes more visible. When you stop filling space with chatter, the empty space reveals what's actually there. And sometimes what's there is doubt, or fear, or insecurity. And that's okay. That's human. But it can feel exposing. This is why most people stay in performance mode their whole lives. Not because they don't want to be real, but because being real feels dangerous. It feels like too much risk. What if people see the real you and don't like it? What if you stop trying to impress people and they stop being impressed? What if you reveal your uncertainties and people lose respect for you? These are valid fears. And I'm not going to tell you they're unfounded. Sometimes people will see the real you and not connect with it. Sometimes your honesty will cost you opportunities. Sometimes your stillness will be mistaken for coldness or arrogance or lack of interest. That's the risk. But here's what I know. The people who matter, the people you actually want in your life, the opportunities that are actually right for you, those people and opportunities will find you more attractive when you're real than when you're performing. Because authenticity is rare. Presence is rare. Most people are so busy managing their image that they never actually show up. So when someone does show up, fully and honestly, it stands out. It matters. It creates connection that performance never can. And the people who are put off by your authenticity, who need you to perform to feel comfortable around you, those aren't your people. Those opportunities that require you to be someone you're not to get them, those aren't your opportunities. And learning to let those go, learning to trust that the right things will come to you when you're being authentic, that's one of the hardest and most important lessons you'll ever learn. I lost relationships when I stopped performing. I lost business deals. I lost opportunities. And every single time, it hurt. Every single time, I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. But looking back now, I can see that every single loss was making space for something better, something more aligned, something more real. The investors who didn't get next, they would have been nightmare partners. The employees who couldn't handle my directness, they would have made terrible team members. The friends who needed me to be someone I wasn't, they weren't actually my friends. They were fans of a persona that was exhausting to maintain. And as I let those relationships fall away, as I stopped trying to be palatable to everyone, the right people started showing up. People who appreciated the directness, who valued the authenticity, who could handle the intensity without needing me to soften it. And building with those people, creating with those people, was so much more fulfilling than anything I'd done while performing. This is what Han Fei understood about governing. You can't be all things to all people. You can't please everyone. And trying to do so just makes you weak and diffuse and ineffective. But when you're clear about who you are, when you're willing to polarize, when you're willing to let some people be uncomfortable with you, that's when you find your true power. That's when you attract the people and opportunities that are actually aligned with who you are and what you're here to do. So yes, presence is uncomfortable. Stillness is uncomfortable. Authenticity is uncomfortable. But you know what's even more uncomfortable? Spending your whole life performing. Spending your whole life trying to earn respect from people who don't actually see you. Spending your whole life not knowing whether people like you or just like the persona you've created. I'd rather be disliked for who I actually am than liked for who I'm pretending to be. Because at least the former is honest. At least the former allows for real connection with the people who do get me. At least the former means I can look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. And that's what this is really about. Yes, these principles will help you command more respect. Yes, they'll make you more influential. Yes, they'll make your words carry more weight and your presence more impactful. But more importantly, they'll help you actually be yourself. They'll help you stop abandoning yourself in pursuit of other people's approval. They'll help you build a life that's actually yours, not a performance of what you think other people want to see. Let me share one more story, and then I want to bring this home. This is more recent, actually. About 5 years ago, I was at a conference, and someone asked me a question during a panel. It was something about my legacy, about how I wanted to be remembered. And it was the kind of question that invites a rehearsed, inspirational answer. Something about changing the world or making a dent in the universe or all of that. And for a moment, I felt that pull to perform, to say the impressive thing, to give them the Steve Jobs they expected. But then I looked out at the audience and I just felt tired. Tired of performing. Tired of being the persona. So I said something I'd never said publicly before. I said, honestly, I don't think about my legacy much. Because legacy is what other people say about you after you're gone, and I won't be there to hear it. What I think about is whether I'm being honest today, whether I'm making things I actually believe in today, whether I'm treating people well today. That's all I can control. That's all that's actually real. And there was this silence, because it wasn't the inspiring answer they wanted. It was just honest. And then someone started clapping, and then more people. And afterwards, dozens of people came up to me to say that was the most real thing they'd heard all day. that they've been so busy thinking about their legacy, about how they be remembered, that they've forgotten to actually be present to their lives. And that's it, isn't it? That's the whole thing. We get so caught up in managing how we're perceived and trying to control our image and our legacy and our reputation that we forget to actually be here, actually be present, actually be ourselves. And in that forgetting, we lose the very thing we're trying to protect. We lose our actual presence, our actual aliveness, our actual humanity. Han Fei wrote that the sage has no self. At first, that sounds like some mystical Eastern philosophy that doesn't translate. But I think what he meant is that the sage isn't identified with any particular image of themselves. They're not attached to being seen a certain way. They're not defending a persona. They're just being what's actually there in each moment, without all the extra layers of self-consciousness and image management. And that's the ultimate stillness. Not physical stillness, though that's part of it, but psychological stillness, emotional stillness, the stillness of not needing to be anyone other than who you are, the stillness of not fighting with reality, the stillness of being so okay with yourself that you don't need constant external validation to know you're okay. And when you reach that place, or even just move toward that place, everything changes. Not because you're manipulating people or using techniques or performing confidence, but because you've stopped trying, you've stopped fighting, you've stopped performing. You just become still, become present, become real. And people feel that. They respond to it. They respect it. Not because you're trying to get respect, but because you're being something that's so rare in this world. Someone who's actually there. Someone who's not lost in their head, not performing for an audience, not trying to control how they're seen. Someone who's just present, just real, just human. So let me bring this home. Let me recap what we've covered and what it means for you going forward. You walked into this video thinking respect was something you earned through performance, through being smart enough, loud enough, impressive enough, accomplished enough. You thought that if you just got your act together, if you just presented yourself well enough, if you just said the right things and made the right impressions, then people would respect you. But what Han Fei taught, what I learned the hard way through being fired and coming back and building and failing and building again, is this: respect isn't earned. It's allowed. You allow it by getting out of your own way, by stopping the performance, by trusting that your presence, your actual unadorned being, is enough. The loudest person in the room is never the most powerful. The person who talks the most is never the most influential. The person who moves the most is never the most commanding. The stillest one is, because stillness forces everyone else to come to you, to lean in, to wonder, to respect. You've been taught to fill every silence, to explain yourself, to prove your worth, to demonstrate your value. That's not confidence. That's desperation dressed up in a good vocabulary. That's fear hiding behind competence. That's insecurity trying to control how it's perceived. Real confidence is still. Real security is quiet. Real presence is calm. Not because it's suppressing anything, but because it's not fighting anything. It's not trying to be something it's not. It's not performing for approval. It's just being what it is fully and completely, and trusting that that's enough. And here's what I need you to understand. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to transform yourself into some idealized version of confidence or charisma or power. You just need to stop hiding who you are behind noise, behind performance, behind the desperate attempt to control how people see you. You're enough, right now, as you are, with all your doubts and fears and uncertainties, with all your imperfections and gaps and rough edges. You're enough. And the moment you start believing that, really believing it, not just intellectually agreeing with it, but actually living as if it's true, that's the moment everything changes. Because you'll stop trying. You'll stop performing. You'll stop chasing respect and start embodying it. Not because you've become perfect or impressive or flawless, but because you become okay with being imperfect and ordinary and human. And that okayness, that deep acceptance of yourself as you are, that's what creates the stillness. That's what creates the presence. That's what creates the respect. Here's your new mantra. I want you to say this to yourself. Write it down. Put Put it somewhere you'll see it every day. Let it sink into your bones until it becomes part of how you see yourself and move through the world. I do not chase respect. I create the space where respect has no choice but to arrive. Read that again. I do not chase respect. I create the space where respect has no choice but to arrive. Because that's the truth. That's the physics we've been talking about. When you stop chasing, when you stop performing, when you stop trying, when you just become still and present and real, respect flows to you naturally. Not because you've earned it or deserved it or fought for it, but because you've created the conditions where it naturally emerges. And those conditions are simple. Be still. Be present. Be real. Stop filling silence out of anxiety. Stop explaining yourself out of insecurity. Stop moving out of restlessness. Stop performing out of fear. Just be. Just exist. Just show up fully as who you actually are, with no apology and no performance. And watch what happens. People will be drawn to you without knowing why. Your words will carry weight you didn't put there. Your presence will command attention you didn't ask for. Your silence will speak louder than most people's words. Not because you've mastered some technique or learned some trick, but because you've become aligned with how respect actually works. You stopped fighting the current and started flowing with it. Now, if this reframe landed, if you felt something shift while watching this, do me a favor. Hit the like button. Not for the algorithm, though that helps, but as a signal to yourself that this matters, that you're committing to this path, that you're willing to try living this way and see what happens. And drop a comment with one word. Just one word that describes what you're feeling right now. Is it relief? Is it fear? Is it excitement? Is it doubt? Whatever it is, put in the comments. Because naming it, acknowledging it, is the first step toward working with it. And if you want more of this, if you want more real philosophy, more counterintuitive wisdom, more deep dives into how things actually work beneath the surface, subscribe. Because this is what I do. This is what I care about. Not surface-level hacks, or quick fixes, or impressive-sounding advice that doesn't actually work, but the real stuff. The principles that actually govern how life works. The truth beneath the noise. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to stop hiding who you are behind noise. Stop abandoning yourself in pursuit of other people's approval. Stop performing a version of confidence you don't feel, and start building actual security through facing discomfort. Take the 3 breaths before speaking. Have your words. Notice your unnecessary movement. Leave without excessive goodbyes. These aren't tricks. They're practices that build the muscle of stillness, the capacity for presence, the foundation of respect. And remember, the goal isn't to never feel anxious or uncertain or insecure. The goal is to be able to feel those things without letting them control you, to be able to sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it, to be able to be silent without filling the space, to be able to be still without needing to move. That's real confidence. That's real security. That's real power. Not the absence of fear, but the ability to act with integrity even when fear is present. Not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to move forward even when you're uncertain. Not the absence of vulnerability, but the courage to be seen as you actually are. Stay still. Stay sharp. Stay real. I'll see you in the next one.